My name is Madeline, 33 years old. Sign this contract right now, or leave my son, my future mother-in-law. Beatrice hissed those words at our lavish engagement party, slamming a 50-page legal document onto my table in front of hundreds of people. She thought she had cornered a helpless orphan with a failing business. She demanded I sign away my rights, assuming I was just a gold digger desperate for her family name. But as I flipped through the heavy contract, my eyes landed on a very specific string of numbers. Her bank was secretly holding my hidden trust fund, and she was trying to force me to waive my right to ever audit it. They had absolutely no idea what they had just started. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart a toxic family that tried to ruin your life. The crystal chandeliers of the Kensington Country Club cast a harsh light on the 200 elite guests murmuring around me. Waiters in white gloves froze in place holding silver trays of champagne. Preston, my fiancé, stood perfectly still beside his mother. Instead of defending me, he stared down at his expensive Italian shoes. Beatrice towered over me in her emerald designer gown. Her voice was intentionally designed to carry across the room. It was sharp and commanding, ensuring every wealthy socialite and bank executive could witness my public humiliation. "We all know why you are really here, Madeline," she announced. Her heavy diamond bracelets clinked together loudly as she tapped her manicured finger against the thick prenuptial agreement. "You run a measly little marketing business that barely makes rent each month. You have no family, no pedigree, and no financial safety net. You came from the foster system, a nobody from nowhere, and now you want to secure your future using my son. Sign the paper, prove you are not just a desperate charity case trying to siphon our legacy." My cheeks burned with intense heat as the wealthy crowd stared at me. I looked at Preston silently, pleading with him to intervene. He just shifted his weight, leaned in, and whispered that I should just do what she says to keep the peace. The sheer cruelty of her words echoed off the polished marble floors. She was intentionally dragging my painful childhood into the spotlight. She used my status as an orphan as a blunt weapon to strip away my dignity. I had built my digital marketing agency from absolutely nothing. I worked grueling 80-hour weeks to put myself through college without a single dime of help from anyone. I earned everything I had. But to Beatrice, I was nothing but a peasant muddying her pristine bloodline. I did not cry. Crying was a luxury I learned I could not afford a long time ago. Instead, I picked up the heavy brass pen she had slammed down next to the contract. The entire room held its collective breath. Beatrice smiled a triumphant, venomous smirk. She truly believed she had successfully broken my spirit. But rather than blindly signing, I decided to actually read what she had placed in front of me. I opened the heavy leather binder. I slowly scanned past the standard clauses about alimony and property division. My eyes moved quickly, processing the aggressive legal jargon carefully designed to leave me entirely destitute if the marriage ever failed. I turned page after page while Beatrice tapped her foot impatiently. Then I reached page 47, Schedule C, Miscellaneous Waivers. The text was incredibly dense, buried deep where nobody would ever bother to look. But a very specific sequence of 12 digits jumped off the crisp white page. I felt all the blood drain from my face instantly. My breath caught sharply in my throat. I knew that exact account number. It was permanently etched into my memory from the faded handwritten letters my late father had sent me before he passed away. It was a private trust fund account number. The paragraph clearly stated that by marrying Preston, I agreed to waive all liability and audit rights for any financial trusts managed by Kensington Regional Bank. Beatrice was not just trying to protect her son, she was trying to legally blindfold me. Why would a prenuptial agreement mention my deceased father's trust fund? I looked up from the pages. Beatrice was watching me with hungry, impatient eyes. She did not see a future daughter-in-law. She saw a legal loophole. I realized right then that this entire lavish wedding was nothing but an elaborate criminal setup. They were secretly stealing my entire inheritance right from me in plain sight. I closed the heavy leather binder with a loud snap. Without another word to Beatrice, I grabbed Preston by his tuxedo sleeve. My grip was tight enough to make him wince. I pulled him away from the prying eyes of his wealthy relatives, dragging him into the dim hallway outside the main ballroom. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind us, muting the jazz band inside. "What is wrong with you, Madeline?" he hissed, yanking his arm away and smoothing his jacket. "Are you trying to embarrass my mother in front of the board?" I stared at the man I was marrying. He looked perfect on the outside, but his eyes were cold. "I am not the one causing a public embarrassment, Preston," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Did you even bother to read that document she threw at me? It is an absolute financial trap." He let out a mocking laugh. "Listen to yourself, Madeline. You sound completely paranoid right now. My mother is just doing her job to protect the Kensington Regional Bank corporate assets. It is standard operating procedure for a family of our status. You are blowing this out of proportion because you are intimidated by her. I am intimidated by the fact that my future husband expects me to sign away my legal rights without letting an independent counsel review it," I shot back. "She wants me to waive all liability. If this is just about protecting your assets, why does it require me to give up my right to sue your family bank?" Preston took a deliberate step closer, towering over me in an attempt to physically intimidate me. "Because you are being ungrateful." He spat out his voice, dripping with condescension. "My family is welcoming you with open arms. We are throwing you a $200,000 wedding. We are giving you a luxurious life you could never achieve on your own. And instead of saying thank you, you are out here playing the victim." His words were carefully designed to make me feel small. He was deploying the exact gaslighting tactics I had heard about, but never thought I would experience firsthand from the man I loved. He wanted me to doubt my own reality. He wanted me to feel like the crazy, irrational woman ruining a beautiful evening. "If you had nothing sinister to hide, you would not have ambushed me in front of 200 people," I said, refusing to back down. Preston crossed his arms tightly across his chest. "Honestly, Madeline, I am starting to think my mother was completely right about you. You come from nothing, and the second we put legal boundaries in place to protect our generational wealth, you throw a hysterical fit. It makes me wonder if you are just upset because you secretly wanted access to my money all along. If you loved me, you would sign the paper and prove you are not a cheap gold digger." The audacity of his accusation made my blood run cold. He was projecting his own family greed onto me. They were the ones plotting to keep me destitute, while pretending to be generous benefactors, rescuing me from poverty. I took a breath, centering myself. I refused to let him see how badly his betrayal hurt my heart. I was not going to play into his convenient narrative of the hysterical fiancé. "I do not want a single dime of your money, Preston," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I never asked for your generational wealth. But I do want to know one very specific thing." He glared at me in arrogant silence. "If this prenuptial agreement is truly only about protecting Kensington Regional Bank assets from me, then why does Schedule C demand that I waive all my audit rights to an external private trust fund?" I took a deliberate step closer, backing him right against the silk wallpaper. "And more importantly, Preston, why is my deceased father private trust account number explicitly listed in a document about your family money?" For a fraction of a second, the arrogant mask slipped entirely from Preston's face. His skin went pale as a ghost. His eyes darted frantically toward the heavy ballroom doors, as if he was desperately looking for his mother to come rescue him. His throat bobbed visibly as he swallowed hard. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The silence in the hallway was deafening. He knew exactly what they were doing to me. Without a single word of explanation, Preston aggressively shoved past my shoulder. He sprinted back into the crowded ballroom, letting the heavy oak doors slam shut in my face, leaving me completely alone in the silent hallway. The morning sunlight filtered through the cracked blinds of my modest one-bedroom apartment. I sat on my faded fabric sofa, clutching a mug of black coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. My eyes were burning from a completely sleepless night. I had replayed the exact look of absolute terror on Preston's face 1,000 times in my head. He was not protecting me. He was hiding something massive. My phone suddenly vibrated against the cheap laminate coffee table. The screen flashed with an incoming call from Caroline. She was Preston's younger sister and the ultimate golden child of the Kensington Empire. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for whatever venom she was about to spit at me, and accepted the call. "You are entirely unbelievable, Madeline," she snapped immediately. "No hello, no polite greeting, just pure unfiltered hostility. Do you have any idea how much damage you did last night? My mother had to spend the entire evening doing damage control with the bank board members because you decided to throw a dramatic tantrum in the hallway like a spoiled child." I kept my voice perfectly flat, refusing to give her the emotional reaction she was craving. "I simply asked a question about a legal document, Caroline. If asking a question ruins a party, then the party was built on a lie." She let out a sharp, condescending laugh. "Oh, please spare me your fake righteous indignation. You are just bitter because you are out of your depth. You do not understand how real wealth operates because you have never had a single thing to your name. In fact, I am sitting in my brand new customized Porsche right now. It cost $150,000. The family bank paid for it in full yesterday morning as a simple early wedding gift for myself. That is the kind of power my family has. You should be down on your knees thanking my mother for even allowing you to breathe our air instead of questioning her business practices." Her words were meant to crush my self-esteem. She wanted me to feel microscopic compared to their vast generational wealth. But her arrogant bragging about the family bank freely handing out luxury sports cars only fueled the burning suspicion in my gut. I ended the call mid-sentence without saying goodbye. I tossed my phone onto the cushion and walked straight over to my small desk. I pulled out my old laptop. It was time to stop asking them questions and start finding my own answers. I booted up the machine and plugged in a heavy encrypted hard drive. It contained the complete digital archives of my late father. He had meticulously scanned every single financial record before his sudden passing. I had not looked at these files in over a decade because the grief was always too heavy to bear. But today the grief was entirely replaced by a freezing, calculating anger. I opened the folder labeled Estate Planning and began searching for the specific 12-digit account number I had memorized from the prenuptial agreement last night. It took me 45 minutes of digging through dense PDF files before I finally found it. The document was titled Irrevocable Trust Agreement. My hands physically shook as I clicked to open the digital file. I began reading the heavily highlighted text my father had left behind. My father had not died penniless like I had always assumed. He was a quiet, brilliant software pioneer who sold his early patents for an absolute fortune. According to page 3 of the document, my father had placed exactly $12 million into a secure trust fund for my future. The terms were explicit and legally unbreakable. I would inherit the entire $12 million sum free and clear on my 35th birthday. However, there was a secondary condition. If I entered into a legally binding marriage before turning 35, the entire trust would immediately unlock and transfer full financial control over to me. I stared at the glowing screen as the horrible truth began to click together piece by terrifying piece. I was 33 years old. My wedding to Preston was scheduled for next month. Marrying him would automatically unlock a massive $12 million fortune I never even knew existed. But why was Beatrice demanding I sign a waiver of liability regarding this specific account? I scrolled down to the very last page of the agreement to find the signature of the financial institution my father had entrusted to safeguard my money. My blood turned into ice water. The designated financial trustee, tasked with managing my $12 million for the last decade, was listed in bold black ink. It was Kensington Regional Bank. 2 hours after discovering the horrifying truth about the trust fund, my phone rang again. It was Beatrice. Her voice flowed through the speaker with a sickeningly sweet tone that made my stomach turn. She insisted we meet for a late morning tea at the Kensington Country Club to smooth over the unfortunate misunderstanding from the night before. I knew what she was doing. She was attempting a classic isolation tactic. I changed into a tailored suit, locked my apartment, and drove to the sprawling private estate. The club was a fortress of generational wealth. Valets parked luxury vehicles, while members in pristine white tennis outfits sipped expensive cocktails on the veranda. I was directed to a private cabana overlooking the 18th hole. Beatrice was already seated wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a pastel silk blouse, looking like the picture of maternal perfection. She smiled brightly as I approached, waving her manicured hand to an empty chair across from her. "Oh, Madeline, dear, I am so glad you came," she purred, pouring me a cup of Earl Grey tea from a silver pot. "I want to apologize if Preston was a bit harsh last night. Men can be so protective of their family legacy. We just want to move past this silly tension and focus on your beautiful wedding." Before I could even respond, Beatrice reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a crisp ivory envelope. She slid it smoothly across the glass table. Inside was a cashier check made out to my name for exactly $50,000. I stared at the sum, and then looked up at her perfectly powdered face. "Consider it a peace offering," she said, taking a delicate sip of her tea. "Use it for the floral arrangements, or a spectacular honeymoon in the Maldives. You have worked so hard to build your little marketing business alone. You deserve a lovely treat. There is just one tiny favor I ask in return." She pulled a sleek black leather folder from the chair next to her and placed it right on top of the envelope. "The prenuptial agreement. I want you to sign this right now, Madeline. Let us not waste any more time or drag expensive lawyers into family matters. Just sign the papers, take the $50,000, and we can go back to planning the happiest day of your life." I kept my hands firmly in my lap, refusing to touch the gold pen she offered. "Why are you rushing this, Beatrice?" I asked, maintaining a calm and neutral expression. "Why are you so desperate to bypass a standard legal review?" Beatrice let out a soft, condescending sigh. She adjusted her diamond necklace, her fake smile tightening at the corners. "Madeline, you are a very sweet girl, and I admire your scrappy, independent spirit, I truly do. But women like you who run these little internet businesses simply do not understand high finance. The corporate banking world is incredibly complex. It is far better to just let the men handle these intricate financial matters. You should be focusing on picking out napkins and dresses, not stressing your pretty head over legal jargon you cannot comprehend." Her blatant sexism was infuriating, but it perfectly revealed her entire strategy. She thought I was an uneducated charity case. She had no idea I had already read the trust documents and knew she was using her bank to bleed my $12 million inheritance dry. She thought $50,000 was enough to blind me to her massive federal crime. I slowly pushed the $50,000 check back across the glass table. The heavy paper slid smoothly, stopping right next to her teacup. "I appreciate the generous offer, Beatrice," I said, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "But I built my business by reading every single contract I sign. I will not put my name on a document that waives my rights without my attorney reviewing the specific trust fund liabilities mentioned in Schedule C." The transformation was instant and terrifying. The sickeningly sweet smile vanished from Beatrice's face, completely replaced by a look of absolute cold-blooded malice. The maternal facade dropped to reveal the ruthless corporate predator underneath. She leaned slowly across the glass table, invading my personal space. Her eyes narrowed into dark, dangerous slits. "Listen to me very carefully, you arrogant little brat," she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. "You are going to sign that contract today, because if you do not, I will make a few phone calls to my board of directors. I will personally make sure your little digital marketing agency loses every single corporate client it has in the city by tomorrow morning. I will bankrupt you before you even walk down the aisle." The chilling reality of her words hung in the air long after she walked away from the cabana. Beatrice was not making an idle threat. By Tuesday morning, the ruthless execution of her promise began. I sat at my agency desk, watching my inbox flood with cancellation emails. My 3 largest accounts pulled their contracts within hours. They all used the exact same vague excuses about sudden budget cuts and unexpected corporate restructuring. But I knew the truth. Kensington Regional Bank held the commercial loans for all 3 of those companies. Beatrice was actively starving me out, weaponizing her financial power to force my compliance. I stared at my plummeting business bank account, feeling the walls closing in. My heart raced as I frantically tried to formulate a backup plan to save my employees. She was systematically destroying the only source of income I had left. I was trapped. Just as the panic began to settle in, my office door swung open. Preston walked in holding a bouquet of expensive white roses, wearing a perfectly tailored suit and an expression of deep, manufactured concern. He placed the flowers on my desk and pulled me into a tight hug. He played the role of the sympathetic savior flawlessly. "I heard about your clients dropping you, Maddie," he murmured, stroking my hair. "I am so incredibly sorry. The market is just so volatile right now." I pulled back slightly, looking into his eyes. He knew exactly what his mother was doing. He was likely the one who gave her the client list. "You know she is not going to stop until she gets what she wants," he continued, his voice dropping to a soft, persuasive whisper. "Just sign the prenuptial agreement, Maddie. It is just a piece of paper. If you sign it today, my mother will back off entirely. We can replenish your business accounts with my money, and we can finally just be happy. Please do it for us." He was playing the good cop to her bad cop. It was a perfectly orchestrated psychological trap. If I fought back, I lost my business. If I signed the paper, I legally surrendered my $12 million inheritance and became complicit in their federal fraud. I needed more time to gather evidence before making my move. It took every ounce of strength I possessed not to scream at him to get out of my office. So I forced a small, defeated smile and nodded. I told him I just needed a few more days to process everything, but that I would cooperate with the wedding preparations. His eyes lit up with arrogant satisfaction, believing I had finally submitted to his control. The very next afternoon, Beatrice called to collect her prize. She demanded I meet her and Caroline at an exclusive bridal boutique downtown to finalize my wedding dress. When I arrived, the boutique owner had already closed the entire store for them. Caroline was sprawled across a pink velvet sofa, sipping champagne and looking at her phone with utter boredom. Beatrice stood in the center of the room, surrounded by racks of breathtaking, intricate silk gowns. But those gowns were not for me. Beatrice waved her hand dismissively at the designer pieces. She instructed the owner to bring out something much more practical. The woman emerged from a back room holding a stiff, plain polyester dress that looked like it belonged on a clearance rack from a decade ago. It was incredibly cheap and completely devoid of any elegance. "Try this one on," Madeline Beatrice commanded, taking another sip of her champagne. "Let us be realistic about who you are. There is absolutely no need to dress you up in imported Italian lace and pretend you come from royalty. This simple dress suits your modest background perfectly. It reminds everyone exactly where you came from. You should learn to appreciate your actual place in our society." Caroline snickered loudly from the sofa, holding her glass up in a mock toast. "It is giving charity case chic. I love it for you." I took the cheap, scratchy fabric from the owner. I walked into the fitting room and stared at my reflection in the mirror. They were trying to break my dignity piece by piece. They wanted me to walk down the aisle looking exactly like the impoverished orphan they believed me to be. I changed into the dress and stepped out. Beatrice nodded with a cruel, satisfied smirk. She turned to the register, tossing her heavy black credit card onto the glass counter as if she had just purchased a rescue dog. I stood on the fitting pedestal, feeling a cold, hard rage solidifying inside my chest. As I turned to walk back to the dressing room, I glanced through the massive front window of the boutique. Parked beside the curb next to the luxury SUVs was Jamal. He was leaning against the car door wearing a sharp suit and a completely unreadable expression. He was looking directly through the glass straight at me. He saw the hideous dress. He saw Beatrice throwing her money around. He witnessed the brutal dynamic of a family he was also trapped inside. He saw the entire humiliating spectacle, and in that brief moment our eyes locked. Jamal gave me a slow, barely perceptible nod. It was a silent, piercing look that confirmed everything. He knew exactly what they were doing to me. That silent exchange with Jamal stayed in my mind all week. I finalized the cheap dress and smiled through every condescending remark. By Sunday evening, I was exhausted from the constant performance, but I knew I had to attend the weekly family dinner at the Kensington estate. A massive crystal chandelier illuminated a long mahogany table covered in expensive silver platters. Preston sat beside me, pouring himself a heavy glass of scotch. Caroline was sitting directly across the table, scrolling lazily on her phone. Jamal wore a crisp white shirt, sitting perfectly still. He barely spoke, but his sharp eyes missed nothing. The tension began to rise the moment the first course was served. Preston quickly turned his attention toward Jamal. Tearing down anyone they secretly viewed as beneath them was a Kensington family sport. So, Jamal Preston began swirling the amber liquid. I saw you traded in your old sedan. Did Caroline finally convince you that driving a domestic car ruins the aesthetic of her driveway? Or did you scrape together a bonus from your little public sector law firm? Caroline laughed, a high-pitched grating sound. Oh, please do not tease him, Preston. His people are frugal. It is his background. He did not grow up summering in the Hamptons like normal people. The microaggressions were veiled as casual country club humor. They spoke to Jamal like an uninvited charity case graciously allowed at their table. They mocked his state university law degree and his quiet, disciplined demeanor. They genuinely believed his silence was submission. They had no idea they were mocking a man who was meticulously analyzing their every flaw. Jamal did not take the bait. He calmly sliced his steak, entirely unbothered. I prefer vehicles that hold their value, Preston, he replied. Flashy things often depreciate the fastest, especially when bought on credit. Preston's face tightened at the jab. He leaned forward aggressively, pointing his silver fork across the table. You always have this quiet, arrogant attitude, Jamal. It is incredibly disrespectful. You sit at our table eating our food and act like you are somehow morally superior. You should learn to be a lot more grateful for the lifestyle my sister provides you. The sheer hypocrisy of Preston lecturing someone about gratitude while actively stealing millions from my trust fund made my blood boil. The rage I had suppressed all week flared up. I opened my mouth ready to unleash a verbal assault on Preston. Before a single word left my lips, I felt a heavy gaze lock onto me. I looked across the table. Jamal was staring directly into my eyes. His expression was completely blank, but he gave his head one microscopic shake. It was a clear, deliberate warning. Stand down. Do not blow your cover. I swallowed my anger, forcing my mouth shut. Jamal was playing a long game. If I exploded now, I would give them exactly what they wanted. I took a slow sip of water to calm down. Jamal turned back to Preston, offering a polite, chillingly empty smile. You are absolutely right, Preston. I have a lot to be thankful for. I am learning new things about this family every single day. Before Preston could respond, a silver spoon tapping against crystal shattered the tension. Beatrice stood at the head of the table. She offered a tight smile. All right, children, let us focus on happy things, Beatrice announced. I have some wonderful news regarding the wedding. I spoke with the event coordinator this afternoon. We are moving the date. Preston looked up surprised. Moving it to when, Mother? Beatrice looked directly at me, her eyes dark and calculating. Next month. We are moving the wedding up to the second week of next month. A cold chill shot straight down my spine. My mind raced frantically. You cannot plan a society wedding of this scale in 4 weeks. Why the sudden rush, Beatrice? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly steady. Beatrice waved her hand dismissively. Oh, it is just a boring corporate necessity, Madeline. We have some complicated internal accounting cycles closing at the end of the quarter. For tax purposes and family trust restructuring, it is just far more beneficial for everyone if you and Preston are legally married before the audits begin. The room suddenly felt as if all the oxygen had been sucked out. Audits. My suspicion went into absolute overdrive. They were not just eager for a wedding, they were running out of time. The federal auditors were closing in on Kensington Regional Bank. Beatrice needed me to sign that prenuptial agreement and become Preston's legally bound wife immediately. If I did not, the missing $12 million would be discovered, and her entire family would go to federal prison. The clock was officially ticking. I pushed my chair back from the heavy mahogany table, muttering a polite excuse about needing some ice water. Beatrice offered a tight approving nod, clearly pleased that her sudden change of plans had seemingly stunned me into absolute silence. Preston did not even bother to look up from his phone. I walked down the long corridor of the estate, my heels clicking softly against the marble floors. I pushed through the swinging doors into the massive caterer kitchen. The room was empty and gleaming with cold stainless steel surfaces. I leaned heavily against the marble island, gripping the edge until my knuckles turned completely white. I took a deep, shaky breath, trying to process the sheer magnitude of their deception. A federal audit. If the government was stepping in, it meant the bank was hiding something far worse than just my missing money. They were using my upcoming marriage as a literal human shield against federal prison. Before I could even pour a glass of water, the kitchen doors swung open with a soft swoosh. I quickly stood up straight, plastering on a fake smile, assuming it was one of the estate staff. But it was not a servant. It was Jamal. He walked in quietly, letting the heavy doors close completely behind him. He did not go to the refrigerator. He did not grab a glass. Instead, he walked directly over to the wall and systematically flipped 3 separate light switches, plunging half the kitchen into shadows. Then he stepped close to the island, standing just inches away from me. The passive, quiet demeanor he always wore at the dinner table vanished entirely. His eyes were sharp, calculating, and intensely focused. "We do not have a lot of time, Madeleine," he said, his voice dropping to a barely audible whisper. "They think I am in the bathroom, but Preston will start looking for you in exactly 2 minutes." I stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Jamal, what is going on?" I asked, keeping my voice equally low. "Why did you look at me like that at the bridal boutique?" He leaned closer, resting his hands flat on the cold marble counter. "Because I know exactly what they are doing to you. You think I am just some quiet lawyer who puts up with their casual racism for the free dinners. I am not. I am a forensic tax attorney for the state. I specialize in dismantling complex corporate fraud, and I have been watching the Kensington family finances very closely for the last 3 years. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. "You know about the trust fund," I whispered, my voice trembling slightly. "I know everything," he replied, his gaze unblinking. "I know your late father left you exactly $12 million. I know Beatrice has been charging phantom management fees to that account since you were 22. And I know that if you sign that prenuptial agreement next month, you will legally absolve them of a massive crime. They are cornering you, Madeleine, but you are not going to let them win." I felt a sudden surge of adrenaline mixed with pure terror. "How can I stop them, Jamal? Beatrice has already threatened to destroy my marketing agency. She took my biggest clients in a single day. If I fight back, she will bankrupt me before the wedding even happens." Jamal glanced quickly over his shoulder, checking the small window in the swinging kitchen doors. "You do not fight back yet," he instructed firmly. "You play the perfect compliant bride. You let them think they have completely broken you. While they are busy celebrating their victory, you gather the ammunition to bury them." He shifted his stance slightly, moving closer to where my designer purse sat open on the edge of the kitchen island. With a movement so smooth and practiced it looked entirely accidental, Jamal bumped his elbow against his suit jacket. A sleek black USB drive slipped silently from his inner pocket and dropped straight into the open compartment of my purse. He immediately stepped back, putting a polite distance between us. The loud sound of heavy footsteps suddenly echoed from the marble hallway outside. Preston was coming. Jamal turned toward the refrigerator, opening the stainless steel door and grabbing a bottle of sparkling water. The kitchen was suddenly flooded with bright artificial light from the fridge. Before walking back toward the dining room, Jamal paused right next to my shoulder. His voice was a cold, deadly whisper that sent shivers straight down my spine. "You are not the only one they are bleeding dry, Madeline. Plug that drive into a secure computer. Look at the folder labeled Internal Audits. And whatever you do, do not use their Wi-Fi." I walked out of the kitchen with my heart hammering against my ribs. I returned to the dining room and forced a smile at Beatrice. I told her I was feeling incredibly nauseous and needed to go home. Preston barely looked up from his phone, simply waving his hand to dismiss me. I walked out the heavy front doors and got into my car. As soon as I cleared the estate security gates, I reached into my purse. I felt the smooth, cold plastic of the USB drive Jamal had dropped inside. Jamal had warned me not to use their internet connection. I realized my own apartment network might already be compromised. I drove straight to a massive 24-hour electronics superstore. I grabbed the cheapest basic laptop they had in stock. I paid in cash so the purchase could never be traced back to me. I drove back to my apartment and ran up the stairs. I immediately locked the heavy deadbolt and fastened the security chain. I pulled every single window blind tightly shut. The silence felt heavy. I sat down at my kitchen table and tore the cardboard box open. I booted up the cheap plastic laptop. A prompt appeared asking me to connect to a local wireless network. I hit skip. I made absolutely sure the machine was isolated from the internet just as Jamal had instructed. I took a deep breath. I pulled the black USB drive from my pocket and slid it into the side port. A small window popped up on the bright screen. I clicked it open. The drive contained hundreds of nested folders holding tens of thousands of internal bank documents. There were balance sheets, email archives, and risk assessment reports. I scrolled down until I found the specific folder Jamal had mentioned. It was labeled Internal Audits. I opened the first master spreadsheet. The screen filled with endless rows of financial data belonging to Kensington Regional Bank. I am not an accountant, but I have run a business long enough to know what a failing company looks like. The numbers were catastrophic. Entire columns were painted in bright red, indicating massive, unrecoverable losses. The bank had over-leveraged itself on toxic commercial real estate loans that had completely defaulted. They had absolutely no liquid cash reserves left. Kensington Regional Bank was entirely insolvent. Based on the daily cash burn rate, they were only a few months away from total collapse and a federal government takeover. The sheer scale of the disaster was paralyzing. Beatrice was not a brilliant financial mind. She was a desperate criminal trying to plug a sinking ship. I moved the cursor to the search bar at the top of the file directory. I slowly typed in the 12-digit account number of my late father trust fund. I hit enter. A single hidden ledger appeared on the screen. It was buried under layers of dummy shell companies. I clicked the file and the financial history of my inheritance loaded onto the screen. I scrolled to the very top to see the starting balance from 5 years ago. It sat at exactly $12 million. Then I looked at the transaction history. Every single month for the last 5 years, massive amounts of money had been silently siphoned out. There were deductions labeled as elite portfolio management fees. There were massive quarterly withdrawals categorized as external consulting retainers. I traced the routing numbers attached to the withdrawals. The money was being wired directly into private holding accounts controlled entirely by Beatrice and Preston. They were using my inheritance as a massive illegal slush fund to artificially inflate the bank cash reserves and fund their lavish personal lifestyle. I scrolled all the way to the bottom of the long document to see the current available balance. The number staring back at me made me physically sick to my stomach. My $12 million legacy had been systematically bled dry. The final remaining balance was a meager $1.2 million. They had stolen almost $11 million from me. The prenuptial agreement was never about protecting their family wealth from me. They had no wealth left to protect. The contract was a calculated legal shield designed to trap me. By signing that paper next month, I would legally absolve them of the theft and grant them permanent ownership of the final $1.2 million. They were going to leave me completely destitute while they walked away free. I slammed the laptop shut. The sadness and confusion I felt earlier was completely gone. In its place was a cold, terrifying clarity. I was going to burn their entire empire to the ground. My chest tightened painfully as I stared at the glowing screen. I pushed the cheap plastic laptop away from me and gripped the edges of my small kitchen table. I was practically hyperventilating. The room spun slightly as the sheer audacity of their crime crashed over me like a heavy, physical weight. I closed my eyes and took a deep, shaky breath, trying to force oxygen into my panicked lungs. Beatrice and Preston had not just made poor corporate investments. They had orchestrated a systematic long-term financial hemorrhage of my inheritance. I pulled the laptop back and scrolled through the transaction logs again, my eyes scanning the endless rows of fabricated deductions. They had repeatedly charged exorbitant portfolio management fees for a dormant cash account that required absolutely zero active trading. They had authorized massive quarterly consulting retainers paid directly to anonymous shell companies. I cross-referenced the routing numbers and traced them straight back to private accounts registered under Kensington family names. They were bleeding my father's hard-earned legacy dry penny by penny, using his money to artificially inflate the balance sheets of a dying bank and fund Caroline's luxury lifestyle. It was textbook embezzlement, executed with terrifying arrogance. As my breathing slowly stabilized, the horrific puzzle pieces finally snapped together to form a clear, terrifying picture. The precise timing of their desperate scheme suddenly made perfect logical sense. According to the irrevocable trust agreement my father had meticulously established, the entire financial structure automatically dissolves on my 35th birthday. I am 33 years old right now. When that specific birthday arrived, the trust would legally transfer full absolute financial control directly to me. I would immediately gain the legal authority to demand a comprehensive independent audit of every single transaction made over the last decade. The second, an independent auditor, looked at these completely fabricated corporate ledgers, the missing $11 million would trigger an immediate federal banking investigation. Beatrice and Preston would be instantly exposed. They would lose their sprawling estates, their exclusive country club memberships, and their freedom. They were looking directly down the barrel of a massive federal indictment, and they knew their clock was rapidly running out. The federal regulators were already circling their insolvent bank, ready to tear their fraudulent empire down to the foundation. A cold, sickening realization washed over me regarding my entire relationship with Preston. Every memory I had of us was instantly tainted. He had not walked into my favorite local coffee shop 2 years ago by pure accident. He had not aggressively pursued me because he found me charming, or driven, or beautiful. I was a targeted mark. I was the naive orphaned girl with a massive $12 million target painted firmly on her back. He romanced me. He isolated me from my few friends, and he proposed to me purely as a strategic corporate acquisition. Every kiss was a calculation. Every romantic dinner was a business expense paid for with my own stolen money. The sudden, aggressive demand at the dinner table to move our wedding up to next month was not about end-of-year tax purposes or family trust restructuring like Beatrice had proudly claimed. The bank was collapsing far more rapidly than they had originally anticipated. They needed to legally neutralize me before the state regulators knocked on their heavy mahogany doors. I reached into my designer purse and pulled out the heavy leather binder containing the prenuptial agreement Beatrice had tried to bribe me into signing at the country club. I flipped past the early decoy pages and went straight back to the miscellaneous waivers hidden entirely at the very back of the document. I read the dense legal jargon again, but this time with my eyes completely open to their malicious intent. The clause did not just prevent me from suing the bank for alimony in the event of a divorce. The The wording was explicitly engineered to legally merge my private trust fund directly into the general corporate assets of Kensington Regional Bank, the very moment I became Preston's legally wedded wife. By putting my signature on that paper and saying "I do" at the altar, I would be permanently waiving my legal right to ever request a financial audit of my own inheritance. The entire marriage was nothing but a sophisticated legal cover-up for a massive federal crime. I was not being welcomed into their prestigious family as a cherished daughter-in-law. I was being recruited to be their unwitting accomplice and their ultimate financial scapegoat. They thought they had trapped a helpless victim, but they had actually handed me the exact weapon needed to destroy them. I had just shoved the cheap laptop into the hidden compartment beneath my floorboards when a rapid knock echoed through my apartment. I wiped my face, forcing my racing heart to slow down, and walked cautiously toward the front door. I checked the brass peephole. It was just Preston. He was standing in the dimly lit hallway holding a massive bouquet of red roses and a small black velvet jewelry box. I took one deep breath, burying my raging emotions behind a fragile, welcoming smile, and unlocked the heavy deadbolt. Preston stepped inside, sweeping me into a tight embrace that instantly made my skin crawl with revulsion. He smelled of cologne and desperation. "Maddie, I'm so sorry for all the pressure lately," he murmured, kissing my head with practiced affection. He opened the velvet box, revealing a diamond bracelet that cost more than my agency made in a year. "I bought this for you. I want you to know how much I love you. The stress of planning this society wedding is tearing us apart, and my mother is driving both of us crazy. Let us just end the madness right now." He fastened the cold diamonds around my wrist. "Let us elope tomorrow morning," he whispered, looking into my eyes with rehearsed devotion. "We can go straight to the downtown courthouse as soon as they open. Just the two of us. We will sign the marriage license and the standard prenuptial paperwork to keep my mother quiet, then fly to Paris. We do not need the country club or the 200 guests judging us. I really just want you." It took every ounce of willpower not to rip the bracelet off and scream the truth in his face. I was staring into the eyes of a man who had systematically stolen over $10 million from my deceased father. He used my stolen money to buy a bracelet to bribe me into signing away my right to report his felony. But Jamal had explicitly told me to play the compliant broken bride. So I let my shoulders slump forward in defeat. I forced hot tears to well up in my eyes. I leaned my head heavily against his chest, playing the exhausted, submissive fiancé perfectly. "Oh, Preston," I whispered, letting my voice crack with manufactured vulnerability. "I am just tired of fighting with your mother. I feel so incredibly overwhelmed and alone in all of this." He stroked my hair, relaxing, as he believed he had finally broken my defenses. "You are not alone," he promised smoothly, wrapping his arms tighter around me. "I am going to take care of everything for us. Just trust me, Maddie." I sniffled loudly and nodded against his expensive wool suit. I told him I loved him and that going to the courthouse tomorrow sounded like a wonderful, peaceful escape. He smiled, a genuine flicker of greedy corporate triumph crossing his face. Preston stayed the night to celebrate his victory. I lay awake for hours in the pitch dark of my bedroom, listening to the rhythmic rise and fall of his breathing. I pretended to be safely nestled in the arms of my future husband, while actually sleeping next to a corporate predator. Around 3 a.m, his breathing finally deepened into a heavy, unshakable snore. I slipped out from under the warm covers with the silent, careful precision of a ghost. I crept to the nightstand where he left his phone charging. Preston was so confident in his manipulation that he never changed his passcode. I knew it was just his birth year. I picked up the glowing device, typed the 4 simple digits, and the home screen unlocked instantly. I moved silently into the hallway, closing the bedroom door just a fraction to block the glaring light. I bypassed his personal emails and went straight into his private text messages. I scrolled down to a pinned conversation with Beatrice. The messages from the past 48 hours were absolutely frantic. I pulled out my own phone and began taking high-resolution photographs of his illuminated screen, capturing every single damning word. Beatrice had texted him earlier that afternoon. The bank board is panicking right now. The state auditors requested our quarterly reserve logs today. We are out of time. Then I finally saw the final message Beatrice had sent him just moments before he knocked on my door. It was the absolute, undeniable smoking gun I desperately needed for the authorities. Beatrice had typed, "Just get the arrogant bitch to sign the legal papers tomorrow morning, no matter what it takes." The SEC auditors are sniffing around the commercial accounts, and we need her trust fund legally merged by Friday, or we are both going to federal prison. The glowing letters on his phone screen burned into my retinas. I carefully slipped the device back onto the nightstand exactly where Preston had left it, making sure the charging cable was angled perfectly. I tiptoed out of the dark apartment, grabbing my car keys and stepping into the freezing night air. I had texted Jamal an hour earlier from my secure burner phone using a coded message we established. We agreed to meet at a rundown 24-hour diner 50 miles outside the city limits, far away from the Kensington Country Club crowd. I drove in complete silence, checking my rearview mirror constantly to ensure no headlights were trailing me. The neon diner sign flickered violently against the dark, isolated highway. I parked my car in the heavy shadows behind a rusting dumpster and walked inside. The place smelled strongly of stale coffee and fried grease. Jamal was already sitting in a back corner booth wearing a dark hooded jacket, completely blending into the worn vinyl seats. I slid into the booth across from him without saying a single greeting. I simply placed my phone on the sticky table and pushed it toward him, displaying the clear photograph of the text message between Preston and Beatrice. Jamal read the frantic message, his jaw clenching so hard I thought his teeth might shatter. He let out a slow, heavy exhale, pushing the phone back to me. "They are officially panicking," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The state regulators issued the subpoenas yesterday morning. I saw the internal memos on the bank server. Beatrice truly thinks she can stall the federal agents until Friday by using your marriage license as a corporate shield." I leaned forward, folding my hands tightly together on the table. "I have the bank ledgers, Jamal. I saw the withdrawals. They stole $11 million from my father. I want them to burn for this. But why are you risking your own career to help me? You are married to Caroline. You are technically part of their elite inner circle." Jamal let out a bitter, hollow laugh that held absolutely no humor. "I am not family to them, Madeline. I am an insurance policy." He looked around the empty diner to ensure the waitress was out of earshot before pulling a thick folded document from his jacket pocket. He slid it across the table. I opened the file. It was a thick stack of federal tax returns filed under Kensington Regional Bank. But the signature at the bottom of the authorized auditor line was not Beatrice. It was Jamal. "I never signed those legal papers," Jamal whispered, his eyes blazing with a quiet, intense fury. "Caroline had full access to my state credentials. She and Beatrice have been systematically forging my signature on their fraudulent tax filings for the last 3 years. They purposely set me up as the ultimate fall guy. When the federal auditors inevitably raid that bank and find the missing millions, the entire paper trail will point directly to the aggressive black tax attorney who married into their wealthy family. They plan to feed me to the wolves to save their own skin. If that corporate ship sinks, I am going straight to federal prison right alongside them." The sheer, calculated evil of their contingency plan left me completely speechless. They were using my inheritance as a massive financial slush fund and using Jamal as their disposable human shield. We were both nothing but pawns on their twisted chessboard. "We cannot wait for the state auditors to find the discrepancies," I said, my voice hardening with cold, absolute resolve. "If we wait, Beatrice will manipulate the narrative and destroy the files. We have to strike them first." Jamal nodded in absolute agreement. "That is the only way we survive this nightmare. We need to split the workload. I am going to use my internal access to compile a flawless financial trace. I will pull the digital metadata proving Caroline forged my signature, and I will map out the exact shell accounts holding your stolen money. I can build an airtight criminal case, but I cannot be the one to hand it over. If Beatrice catches me digging, she will destroy the evidence and frame me instantly. I understand, I replied immediately. You build the weapon. I will pull the trigger. I will take everything directly to the FBI and the Securities and Exchange Commission. I will secure the federal whistleblower protections to keep us safe. Jamal reached across the table and shook my hand. It was a solemn binding pact between two survivors fighting for their freedom. He stood up, sliding out of the booth and pulling his hood back over his head. Be incredibly careful, Madeline, he warned, his tone turning deadly serious. Do not underestimate Beatrice. She is a cornered, desperate animal, and she does not trust you at all. She hired a ruthless private investigator to follow you starting yesterday morning. He is driving a dark gray sedan. From this second forward, you have to be flawlessly deceptive. One wrong look, one suspicious phone call, and she will know you are onto them. The drive home was incredibly agonizing. Knowing a private investigator was watching my every move, I walked into my building projecting the posture of a completely defeated woman. I forced myself to sleep for 3 hours. When the morning sun finally broke through my blinds, I picked up my phone. I dialed Beatrice. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced my voice to sound incredibly light and perfectly cheerful. Good morning, Beatrice, I said, pouring hot coffee. I wanted to apologize for my hesitation over the last few weeks. Preston and I talked last night, and I completely understand now. The prenuptial agreement is a standard procedure to protect the family legacy. I am ready to sign it today. I could practically hear her venomous smirk through the receiver. Oh, Madeline, that is absolutely wonderful news, she purred, her voice dripping with fake maternal warmth. I knew you were a smart girl. We can have everything finalized this afternoon. There is just one tiny detail, I added, keeping my tone casually apologetic. I sent the document to a budget lawyer to look it over. He said I need to add a standard severability clause to page 40 to ensure the contract holds up if a state law changes. It is basic legal formatting. If your legal team can draft that minor addendum, I can come to the bank and sign the entire package immediately. Beatrice hesitated. A severability clause was meaningless in the grand scheme of her embezzlement, but it would force her legal team to redraft the final pages. It bought me exactly 48 hours of crucial stalling time while appearing completely compliant. Fine. Beatrice sighed, sounding annoyed but victorious. Come to my office at the bank at 2 o'clock. We will sign preliminary decoy documents today to get the process moving and execute the final amended version on Friday. I hung up the phone. I spent the next few hours getting dressed, choosing a modest beige dress designed to make me look like a submissive future daughter-in-law. I drove to the massive headquarters of Kensington Regional Bank. Knowing what I knew now, the entire building felt like a giant hollow illusion. The expensive marble floors and crystal chandeliers were entirely paid for with my stolen inheritance. A sleek elevator took me to the top-floor executive suite. Beatrice sat behind a massive mahogany desk, looking like a corporate queen who had conquered her final enemy. She gestured for me to sit across from her. A thick stack of preliminary legal documents rested perfectly centered on her desk, next to a steaming cup of black coffee. You made the right choice, Madeline, she said, pushing a heavy gold pen across the polished wood. Preston was so relieved this morning. We are going to have a beautiful wedding, and you are going to be a wonderful addition to our family. I smiled warmly, picking up the pen. I knew she was looking at me like a foolish sheep walking willingly into the slaughterhouse. I signed my name on the preliminary decoy documents, making sure my handwriting looked perfectly steady. Every stroke of the pen bought Jamal more time to extract the hidden financial routing numbers from the server down the hall. As I handed the signed papers back to Beatrice, I stood up slightly, adjusting my purse on my shoulder. I made sure my elbow jutted out just enough to catch the edge of her porcelain coffee cup. The cup tipped over, instantly spilling scalding hot black coffee all over the corner of her pristine mahogany desk. Oh my goodness, I gasped, covering my mouth in manufactured horror. I am so incredibly sorry, Beatrice. Let me get some paper napkins immediately. Beatrice jumped up from her leather chair, cursing loudly as the hot liquid narrowly missed her expensive silk skirt. She rushed toward the private executive bathroom attached to her office to grab some towels. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind her. I had exactly 10 short seconds. I dropped the helpless act instantly. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and leaned directly over her desk. The spilled coffee had ruined a stack of meaningless memos, but it exposed a thick manila folder she had desperately tried to hide underneath. The folder was flipped open. The document inside bore the unmistakable gold seal of the federal government. I quickly snapped 3 clear photographs of the crisp white page. It was a direct federal subpoena from the Securities and Exchange Commission, ordering Beatrice to surrender all offshore bank routing numbers by tomorrow morning. She was not just running out of time. The federal trap was already snapping shut entirely around her throat. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, remaining completely undetected. I walked out of the bank building with my heart pounding against my ribs. The digital photographs of the federal subpoena felt like a loaded weapon burning a hole in my pocket. I had survived the lion den. But as I unlocked the door to my modest apartment, my brief sense of victory vanished completely. Preston was pacing frantically back and forth across my small living room. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and his expensive suit jacket was discarded on my sofa. He looked absolutely terrified. "Maddie. Thank God you are home," he gasped, rushing over and grabbing my shoulders. His palms were sweating. "I need your help immediately. We have a massive financial emergency." I kept my expression soft and concerned, masking the cold calculation turning in my mind. "What is wrong, Preston?" I asked softly. "Is the wedding budget overextended?" He let out a sharp manic laugh, running a hand through his hair. "No, it is not the wedding. It is an investment. I had a massive short-term capital call on a commercial real estate startup. If I do not wire $200,000 by tomorrow morning, I will lose my entire equity stake. My trust funds are temporarily locked in the prenuptial escrow until Friday, so I cannot access my own cash. I need you to take out a home equity line of credit on your apartment right now." I stared at him, letting his incredibly audacious lie wash over me. A startup investment. Thanks to Jamal compiling the financial trace last night, I already knew exactly where Preston was spending his nights. He did not have a startup capital call. He had a massive underground gambling debt. He owed a dangerous syndicate $200,000, and they were demanding immediate payment before he walked down the aisle. The sheer, unadulterated evil of his request pushed my internal rage to an absolute boiling point. This man and his mother had systematically embezzled $11 million of my father's hard-earned legacy. They had drained my massive trust fund to fund their luxury cars and country club memberships. Now desperate to save his own skin from violent bookies, Preston wanted me to mortgage the very last piece of property I owned. He wanted to strip away my only remaining shelter to cover his pathetic gambling losses, while preaching about investing in our beautiful future. I wanted to scream. I wanted to slap his perfectly moisturized face and tell him I knew everything. But I remembered Jamal warning in the dark diner. I had to remain flawlessly deceptive. "Oh, Preston, that sounds incredibly stressful," I whispered, placing my hands gently on his chest. "You have given me so much since we met. If mortgaging my apartment secures our financial future together, then of course I will do it. We are a team." The relief that washed over his face was absolutely nauseating. He genuinely believed I was the dumbest, most compliant woman on the planet. He pulled out his laptop, immediately pulling up an expedited online equity loan application through a rival bank. I sat beside him on the couch playing the obedient bride. I typed in my social security number and verified my apartment deed. Because I owned the property outright and had good credit, the automated underwriting system approved the $200,000 equity loan almost instantly. Preston kissed my cheek, his eyes gleaming with greedy desperation. You are a lifesaver, Maddie. The funds should hit your account by tomorrow morning. Just wire the money directly to my personal checking account the second it clears. I have to go meet my broker right now to buy us some time. I love you so much. He grabbed his jacket and bolted out the door, leaving me alone. I walked over to the window and watched his luxury car speed away down the street. I felt the cold reality of the war I was fighting. The next morning, the bank notification pinged on my phone. The $200,000 from the equity loan was officially deposited into my checking account. Preston texted me 3 seconds later, demanding I send the transfer immediately. I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. I logged into my banking portal, but I did not type in Preston routing number. Instead, I pulled up the secure contact information for the most ruthless, high-profile federal whistleblower attorney in the state. I typed in the law firm's secure trust account routing number. Without hesitation, I executed the wire transfer, sending the entire $200,000 directly to the attorney as a non-refundable legal retainer. Preston was not getting a single dime to pay his bookies. I just bought the legal firepower to send him to federal prison. 2 days later, I walked into an unmarked glass building in the financial district. I rode the private elevator down to the secure basement conference room. Sitting at the long steel table was Patricia Montgomery. She was the most ruthless corporate litigator on the East Coast. Beside her sat 2 federal agents wearing dark suits and stern expressions, Special Agents Reynolds and Carter from the White Collar Crime Division. I took a seat across from them, sliding my heavy leather tote bag onto the cold metal table. Patricia adjusted her glasses and looked at me with piercing gray eyes. "We received your wire, Madeline," she said, her voice sharp and strictly business. "You claimed on our encrypted intake call that you have actionable intelligence regarding the insolvency of Kensington Regional Bank. The federal government is already looking into their commercial loan defaults. What do you have that we do not already know?" I did not waste time with small talk. I reached into my bag and pulled out the black USB drive Jamal had given me. I slid it across the table toward Agent Reynolds. "I have the entire internal server logs," I replied, keeping my voice steady, "including the hidden ledgers. Beatrice and Preston have systematically embezzled $11 million from my private trust fund over 5 years. They used dummy shell corporations to siphon the money under the guise of elite management fees." Agent Reynolds raised an eyebrow, looking skeptical. He plugged the drive into his encrypted laptop. While the files loaded, I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. I opened the photo gallery and pushed the device toward Agent Carter. "Here are the text messages between Beatrice and Preston from 3 nights ago," I explained. "They discuss forcing me to sign a prenuptial agreement to legally merge my trust fund into their general corporate assets before the SEC auditors discover the missing funds." I then pulled out the heavy prenuptial binder and placed it next to the phone. "Here is the contract Beatrice tried to force me to sign in front of 200 people at our engagement party. Schedule C contains the exact liability waiver designed to cover up their federal crimes. I also included photographs of a federal subpoena currently sitting on Beatrice's desk, which she is actively trying to hide from her board of directors." The room fell completely silent, except for the rapid clicking of Agent Reynolds' keyboard. He opened the files Jamal had meticulously organized. He cross-referenced routing numbers with the text messages and the clauses in the prenuptial agreement. As he scrolled through the endless rows of fabricated deductions, the skepticism on his face vanished entirely. It was replaced by a look of absolute stunned disbelief. He looked up at Patricia, and then back at me. "I have been investigating corporate bank fraud for 15 years, Agent Reynolds said, his tone laced with genuine shock. "I have never seen a family act with this level of sheer, unadulterated arrogance. They are using your upcoming marriage to legally launder a massive federal felony. The paper trail your source compiled is flawless." Patricia leaned forward, clasping her hands together. Her eyes gleamed with the thrill of a guaranteed victory. "We have them, Madeline," she declared confidently. "The wire fraud, the embezzlement, the breach of fiduciary duty. We can freeze every single asset they own by tomorrow morning." I felt a massive wave of relief wash over me, but Agent Carter held up his hand, stopping the celebration before it could even begin. "We have a massive paper trail, yes," Agent Carter said, leaning back in his chair with a heavy sigh. "But Beatrice is a highly connected bank president with an army of defense lawyers. If we raid the bank right now based purely on these ledgers, she will immediately claim ignorance. She will blame the missing funds on rogue accounting errors, or worse, she will pin the entire embezzlement scheme on her internal tax attorney. She will say she had no idea they were fraudulent." I felt my stomach drop, recalling Jamal warning about how Beatrice had already forged his signature on the tax returns. "She is setting up her son-in-law to take the fall," I told the agents. "She forged his authorization." "Exactly," Agent Carter replied, nodding gravely. "White-collar cases require absolute proof of intent. If she can create reasonable doubt, she might avoid prison. We need something undeniable. We need Beatrice or Preston to publicly admit their specific intent regarding the trust fund manipulation. We need them to confess knowledge of the missing $11 million on tape or in front of credible witnesses. Without an admission tying them directly to the theft, the federal prosecutors will not authorize the immediate indictments." I left the federal building with my mind focused. The agents had drawn a clear line. I needed a confession. I needed someone in the Kensington family to admit they knew the money they were spending belonged to my deceased father. The opportunity arrived much faster than I had ever anticipated. The next morning, I sat in my quiet agency office. The phones were completely silent since Beatrice stripped away my corporate accounts. Suddenly, the glass door swung open with a violent crash. Caroline stomped into the room wearing massive dark sunglasses and clutching an expensive designer handbag. Her hair was disheveled and she smelled strongly of stale alcohol and expensive perfume. She slammed her handbag onto my desk and collapsed into the chair. "I need you to do your public relations magic right now, Madeline," she demanded, pulling off her sunglasses to reveal heavy dark circles. "I got pulled over last night in the Hamptons. The officer gave me a ridiculous driving under the influence charge. A local blogger got a photograph of my car being towed and is threatening to publish it. I need you to bury the story immediately." I stared at her, feeling a surge of adrenaline. I slowly slid my cell phone closer to the center of the desk, casually tapping the screen to silently activate the voice memo recording application. I kept my face entirely neutral. "Caroline." "That sounds like a serious legal issue," I said. "My agency handles corporate marketing, not personal crisis management. A specialized crisis firm requires a massive retainer for something like this." Caroline let out a sharp, grating laugh. "A retainer? Are you completely insane? You are going to do this for free because you are practically family now." She leaned forward, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. "Let us be entirely clear about our dynamic, Madeline. You are the help. You are a nobody lucky to be marrying into financial royalty. My family is giving you a life you do not deserve. Doing me this favor is the least you can do to repay us." Her words were laced with an entitlement so deeply ingrained it was physically nauseating. She truly believed I was nothing more than an unpaid servant indentured to her family through my upcoming marriage to Preston. I forced a tight, compliant smile, nodding slowly as if her insults had put me in my place. "You are right, Caroline," I replied smoothly. "I apologize. I will handle the blogger and bury the story for you. But if I need to pay off this blogger to kill the photograph, I need to know where the funds are coming from. My agency accounts are low right now. Should I ask Preston to wire me the cash?" Caroline rolled her eyes, letting out an exasperated sigh. "Preston is broke right now. He gambled away his quarterly allowance again. Do not bother him. Just use the family slush fund. My mother handles all the discretionary spending from there." I leaned in just slightly, ensuring the microphone on my phone picked up every single syllable. "The family slush fund," I asked, feigning innocent confusion. I did not realize Kensington Regional Bank had a designated fund for personal public relations crises. "Is that a corporate bank account?" Caroline scoffed loudly, completely oblivious to the massive trap closing around her throat. "Oh, please, Madeline, do not be so naive. It is not a corporate account. It is some dead guy private trust fund that my mother manages. He died years ago and left it to some clueless relative. My mother has been using it as our own personal limitless slush fund for the past 5 years to keep our lifestyles afloat while the bank restructuring happens. Just send the blogger payoff invoice directly to her and she will authorize a fake management fee withdrawal from the trust to cover it. She does it literally every single week. My breath caught in my throat. I could not believe she had just handed me the exact weapon I needed on a silver platter. Her sheer arrogance had completely blinded her to her own criminal exposure. "Thank you, Caroline," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I will get to work on this immediately." She stood up, putting her sunglasses back on. "See? I knew you could be useful to us," she smirked, turning and walking out of my office. The moment the glass door clicked shut, I reached out and stopped the recording. I looked down at the digital audio file saved on my screen. Caroline had just explicitly confessed to the systematic embezzlement of my inheritance on tape. The federal agents now had the undeniable proof of criminal intent. The Kensington family empire was officially over. I quickly forwarded the audio file to Patricia. Within an hour, Agent Reynolds confirmed the warrants were officially signed by a federal judge. The trap was set. I just had to attend the rehearsal dinner and let the Kensington family dig their own graves. The following evening, I walked into the grand ballroom of the Grand Regent Hotel. The rehearsal dinner was a spectacular display of stolen wealth. Massive floral arrangements covered the five-star venue. Crystal chandeliers illuminated a room filled with 150 powerful VIP guests. Beatrice had invited the entire bank board of directors along with local politicians. It was a massive public relations event designed to project absolute financial stability right before the auditors arrived. Preston stood near the ice sculpture holding champagne and laughing loudly with a state senator. He looked incredibly arrogant. He genuinely believed his gambling debts were covered by my apartment mortgage, and his marriage would permanently wash away his crimes. Seeing me enter, he walked over and placed a possessive hand on my lower back. He played the devoted fiancé flawlessly, kissing my cheek and parading me around the room like a newly acquired corporate asset. Beatrice was holding court at the head table. She wore a stunning silver gown that probably cost more than my entire college tuition. She looked completely triumphant. She truly believed she had successfully broken my spirit and secured her illegal slush fund forever. From across the room, I caught Jamal's eye. He was standing quietly near the bar, sipping a club soda. He gave me one microscopic nod. It was the signal. The federal agents were in position outside the building, waiting for my cue. As the first course was being served, I quietly excused myself from the crowded table. I navigated through the sea of wealthy guests and walked down the long marble hallway toward the ladies' restroom. I pushed through the heavy wooden doors and walked over to the gilded mirrors, taking a deep breath to steady my racing heart. I smoothed down the fabric of my dress, preparing myself for the explosive confrontation that was about to unfold. Before I could even turn on the gold faucet, the restroom door swung open with a violent thud. Beatrice stepped inside. Her silver gown shimmered under the vanity lights, but her face was entirely stripped of its fake maternal warmth. She reached behind her and pushed the heavy brass lock on the door, sealing us inside the empty marble room. She walked briskly toward me, her high heels echoing sharply against the tile floor. She did not say a single word of greeting. Instead, she reached into her designer clutch and pulled out a thick, folded stack of legal papers. It was the final legally binding prenuptial agreement, complete with the severability clause I had requested and the liability waiver that would permanently merge my trust fund into her bank assets. Beatrice slammed the documents down onto the marble counter right next to my hands. She pulled a heavy gold pen from her purse and placed it on top of the crisp white pages. "We are done playing these exhausting little games," Madeline Beatrice hissed, her voice dropping to a dangerous, venomous whisper. "The board members are sitting out there and the final quarter is closing. You are going to execute this contract right here and right now." I looked at the documents and then looked back up at her perfectly powdered face. I kept my posture entirely relaxed, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing my fear. "I thought we agreed to sign the final version tomorrow morning before the ceremony, Beatrice." I replied, keeping my tone soft and inquisitive. Beatrice took a threatening step forward, invading my personal space. Her eyes were dark and completely merciless. She cornered me against the marble sink, trapping me completely. "I do not care what we agreed to, you arrogant little brat," she snarled, her composure completely snapping. "You have stalled me for the absolute last time. Sign it now, or you do not walk out of this bathroom." I looked at the heavy gold pen resting on the contract. The sheer desperation in her voice confirmed everything. She was an animal caught in a trap of her own making. I reached out and slowly picked up the gold pen. The cold metal felt heavy in my fingers. Beatrice let out a harsh breath of relief, assuming I was finally surrendering to her absolute authority, but I did not sign the paper. I looked up at Beatrice and allowed a slow, freezing cold smile to spread across my face. "I prefer to sign it in front of our guests," I said, my voice echoing with terrifying absolute calm, a beautiful show of unity. I walked down the marble hallway, my posture perfectly straight and my head held high. The cold dread that had controlled me for the past month was entirely gone, replaced by a sharp, burning adrenaline. I re-entered the grand ballroom, where the loud chatter and clinking crystal instantly washed over me. I returned and took my seat at the head table directly next to Preston. He smiled his greasy, confident smile, placing his hand over mine. "You look beautiful, Maddie," he murmured, entirely clueless about the trap closing around him. A moment later, Beatrice emerged from the hallway. She had expertly masked her frantic bathroom panic with a flawless layer of high society poise. She glided gracefully to the head table, holding the thick legal document tightly against her side. She picked up a silver spoon and tapped it gently against her crystal champagne flute. The sharp ringing sound cut clearly through the soft jazz music. The room of 150 elite guests immediately fell silent. Beatrice smiled warmly, wiping a completely fabricated tear from her eye. "Thank you all for gathering here tonight," she began, her voice echoing through the massive ballroom speakers. "We are here to celebrate the upcoming union of my son Preston and his beautiful bride Madeline. As many of you know, Madeline had a very difficult start in life. She grew up without the love and support of a real family. She came to us with absolutely nothing but a dream and a small, struggling business. But we did not look at her pedigree. We looked at her heart. We are so incredibly proud to open our arms and welcome this resilient orphaned girl into our prestigious legacy. It is a true, modern fairy tale." The crowd murmured with sickening approval. Some wealthy socialites actually dabbed their eyes, overwhelmed by the sheer manufactured generosity of the Kensington family. It was a masterful performance. She was publicly painting herself as a benevolent savior, while actively plotting to steal everything I owned. Beatrice turned to me, extending her manicured hand to invite me up to the microphone. "Madeline, dear, please come up here," she said, her voice dripping with fake affection. I stood up and walked to the podium, standing directly beside her. Beatrice placed the heavy prenuptial agreement onto the wooden stand right in front of the microphone. She held up the heavy gold pen for the entire room to see, making sure the board of directors had a clear view. "In today's complex corporate world, love must be built on absolute transparency and trust," Beatrice announced to the captivated audience. "To prove her pure intentions and to show everyone here that she is marrying my son for love and not for our family wealth, Madeline has graciously insisted on signing her prenuptial agreement right here before all of you." The room erupted into polite, enthusiastic applause. Preston stood up from his chair, clapping the loudest, looking like a proud, generous prince. He walked over to the podium, standing on my other side, boxing me in. "Go ahead, sweetheart," he whispered, leaning into my ear, his tone carrying a dark, underlying threat. "Show everyone how much you love me. Just sign it, and this will all be over." I looked out at the sea of expectant faces. I saw the bank board of directors sitting at the front tables, nodding in arrogant approval. They thought they were witnessing a brilliant corporate maneuver. They thought they were watching a helpless, naive girl surrender her entire future to protect their bottom line. Then I looked toward the back of the room. Jamal stood alone near the heavy oak doors. He did not clap. He simply gave me a single decisive nod. The federal agents were in position. The absolute power they thought they held over me was nothing but a fragile illusion waiting to be shattered. I took the heavy gold pen from Beatrice. She exhaled a sharp, quiet breath of victory. I looked down at the contract, specifically at the liability waiver designed to steal my inheritance. I let the silence stretch for a long, agonizing moment. The applause faded away completely. The ballroom grew entirely quiet. Every single guest stared at me, wondering why I was hesitating to accept their magnificent charity. I slowly set the gold pen down on the wooden podium. I reached out and took the microphone from the stand. I turned my body slightly, ignoring Beatrice completely, and locked my eyes directly onto Preston. My voice was calm, cold, and amplified across the massive room. "I will gladly sign this contract, Preston," I said, watching the color instantly drain from his face. "Right after you explained to me and your entire board of directors exactly where my $10 million went." The absolute silence in the grand ballroom was so profound that I could hear the sharp intake of breath from the state senator sitting 2 tables away. Beatrice stood completely frozen beside me. The color drained from her powdered face, leaving her looking like a ghost. Her manicured hand gripped the edge of the wooden stand so tightly that her knuckles turned stark white. She opened her mouth to speak, but her throat simply could not form the words. She knew I had completely cornered her. I did not scream. I did not cry or throw a dramatic tantrum like Preston always accused me of doing. Instead, I reached down into my heavy leather tote bag, resting near my feet. With terrifying calmness, I pulled out a thick, bound stack of printed financial ledgers. I lifted the microphone and stepped slightly away from Beatrice to ensure my voice would project perfectly across the room. I opened the first page of the ledger. I looked directly at the front table where the bank board of directors were seated. "Gentlemen," I said, keeping my tone conversational and ice-cold, "you have been led to believe that Kensington Regional Bank is navigating a minor liquidity issue. You are being lied to. This family is insolvent, and they have been actively embezzling funds to hide their massive commercial loan defaults." I looked down at the highlighted lines on the paper. On October 4th of last year, Beatrice authorized a phantom management fee withdrawal of $450,000 from my private irrevocable trust. That money was wired directly to an offshore shell corporation, registered under Preston's name. On January 12th, another withdrawal of $600,000 was categorized as a consulting retainer. That money went straight toward paying off Preston's massive underground gambling debts. The ballroom erupted into a chaotic symphony of gasps and frantic whispers. Chairs scraped loudly against the marble floor as several board members stood up in absolute shock. The chief financial officer of the bank turned entirely pale. He looked frantically between the documents in my hand and Beatrice, who was now visibly shaking. The carefully constructed illusion of the Kensington Empire was rapidly crumbling right before their eyes. I turned the page and read the next line without missing a single beat. On March 22nd, just 2 weeks after Preston proposed to me, another $800,000 was drained to cover the sudden margin call on Caroline Luxury Real Estate Investments. Over the course of 5 years, $11 million of my father's legacy was systematically stolen by the very people standing in this room. And this prenuptial agreement, I pointed to the document resting on the podium, was explicitly drafted to merge my remaining funds into their corporate assets by tomorrow morning. It was never a marriage. It was a calculated legal shield to hide their federal crimes from the state auditors. Preston finally snapped. The charming, sophisticated facade he had worn for 2 entire years shattered into a million pieces. His face twisted into an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He slammed his champagne glass down onto the table, shattering the crystal instantly. "Shut up, you psychotic liar!" he screamed, his voice cracking with panicked desperation. He stormed toward the podium, pointing an aggressive finger directly at my face. "She is completely insane, Mother. Do not listen to her. She fabricated those documents because she is a bitter gold digger trying to extort us. Someone call the hotel security and throw this crazy bitch out into the street right now. I stood my ground, refusing to take a single step back. I looked at him with absolute disgust. The evidence is right here, Preston. The routing numbers match your private offshore accounts perfectly. The federal government already has every single piece of this data. The mention of the federal government pushed Preston over the edge of sanity. He realized his money, his freedom, and his reputation were entirely gone. He let out a primal roar of fury. He lunged forward, closing the short distance between us in a split second. He raised his heavy right hand, pulling his arm back to strike me directly across the face. Several guests screamed in terror. I braced myself for the violent impact, but the blow never came. Before Preston's hand could even come close to my skin, a massive muscular arm shot out from the shadows behind the podium. A large hand clamped down around Preston's wrist with the unstoppable crushing force of a steel vice. The sheer momentum of the block stopped Preston completely dead in his tracks, making him gasp in sudden pain. Preston looked up, his eyes wide with shock. Standing directly between us, radiating a terrifying absolute authority, was Jamal. Jamal shoved Preston backward with such force that Preston stumbled, crashing heavily into the edge of the head table. The remaining champagne glasses shattered violently against the floor. Jamal did not flinch. He adjusted the cuffs of his crisp white shirt, pulling his jacket straight with the deliberate, terrifying precision of a predator who had finally cornered his prey. Do not ever attempt to touch her again. Jamal stated, his voice a low, lethal rumble that carried clearly across the silent ballroom. He then turned his back completely on Preston, dismissing him as entirely irrelevant. Jamal stepped away from the podium, moving directly into the center of the room. He looked out at the sea of terrified, wealthy faces before his gaze locked squarely onto Caroline. She was sitting 3 tables away, her jaw completely unhinged in shock. The expensive designer gown she wore suddenly looked ridiculous against the backdrop of her impending destruction. And while we are discussing the end of fraudulent contracts, Jamal announced, his crisp, commanding attorney voice filling the massive space. I have an announcement of my own regarding this family. As of 3 o'clock this afternoon, I have officially filed for divorce from Caroline Kensington. Caroline let out a loud, dramatic gasp, pressing her hand to her chest. Jamal, are you insane? She shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly over the soft jazz that was still inexplicably playing in the background. You cannot divorce me. You have absolutely nothing without my family. You are living in a house my mother paid for. Jamal offered her a slow, chilling smile. That is where you are entirely wrong, Caroline. I have everything. Because unlike the rest of your family, I am a forensic tax attorney who actually understands how to read a corporate balance sheet. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a single neatly folded document, holding it up for the room to see. I know exactly how you and your mother forged my signature on the state tax returns for the last 3 years. I know you attempted to set me up as the ultimate fall guy when the federal auditors eventually raided your failing bank. You thought I was just the quiet minority husband you could easily manipulate and discard. Caroline's face turned an ugly shade of red. She stood up violently, knocking her chair backward. You are lying, she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at him. Mother, tell them he is lying. He is just a bitter gold digger trying to steal my money. You have no money, Caroline. Jamal shot back, his voice cutting through her hysterics like a knife. The cars, the jewelry, the Hamptons estate. It is all purchased with stolen funds. And because I actually know how the law works, I secured full federal immunity yesterday morning. I turned over every single one of your mother fraudulent ledgers directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission. I handed them the digital metadata proving your forgery. Your accounts are frozen. Your credit cards will decline by midnight. You are left with absolutely nothing. The realization hit Caroline like a physical blow. Her knees buckled and she collapsed back into her chair, letting out a hysterical, sobbing wail that echoed pathetically across the grand ballroom. The golden child was entirely broken, realizing her lifetime of unearned privilege was officially over. Beatrice finally snapped out of her paralyzed shock. The flawless high society matriarch completely unraveled, transforming into a cornered feral animal. Her chest heaved as she hyperventilated, her eyes darting frantically around the room at the board members, who were already pulling out their phones to call their own defense attorneys. "Security!" Beatrice screamed, her voice cracking in pure desperation. "Hotel security, get in here immediately." She pointed a violently shaking finger at Jamal and me. "These people are insane. They are trespassing. Throw them out into the street. Arrest them for slander. I want them removed right now." She slammed her hand against the head table, causing the remaining silverware to clatter loudly. "I am Beatrice Kensington," she roared at the top of her lungs, trying to force the room back into submission through sheer volume. "I own this town. I will ruin anyone who listens to these disgusting lies." The heavy mahogany double doors at the back of the grand ballroom suddenly swung open with a massive resounding crash. Beatrice let out a sharp, victorious laugh, assuming her elite power had summoned the hotel guards to rescue her. "See," she spat, glaring at me with absolute venom. "You are finished, Madeline." But as the heavy doors swung wide, it was not the hotel security staff standing in the threshold. The men walking into the room were not wearing standard black hotel uniforms. They were wearing dark suits, rigid tactical vests, and navy blue windbreakers with bright yellow block letters printed clearly across their chests. FBI. At least a dozen federal agents flooded into the grand ballroom. Their heavy combat boots thudded in perfect unison against the polished marble floor, completely drowning out the soft jazz music that abruptly screeched to a halt. The sheer imposing presence of the FBI instantly shattered the fragile illusion of high society elegance. Wealthy guests scrambled backward, knocking over crystal champagne flutes and floral centerpieces in a desperate panic to get out of the way. The state senator, who had been laughing with Preston just 20 minutes ago, practically dove behind a heavy silk curtain to avoid being photographed near the incoming raid. The chief financial officer of the bank dropped his drink, watching his entire career evaporate right before his eyes. Agent Reynolds led the tactical formation. His face was set in a mask of absolute authority. He did not look at the frightened socialites or the panicked board of directors. His eyes were locked dead onto the head table. The agents marched straight down the center aisle, parting the sea of expensive designer gowns and tailored tuxedos like a massive, unstoppable wave. Beatrice stood frozen at the podium. The heavy gold pen she had tried to force me to use rolled off the slanted wooden surface and clattered uselessly onto the floor. As Agent Reynolds approached the steps of the elevated head table, Beatrice desperately tried to pull the shattered pieces of her elite persona back together. She stood up perfectly straight, raising her chin and glaring down at the federal agents with all the manufactured superiority she could muster. "Excuse me." Beatrice snapped, her voice trembling, but still laced with pure arrogance. "This is a highly exclusive private event. You cannot just barge in here and disrupt my rehearsal dinner. I demand to speak to the director of your field office immediately." Agent Reynolds did not break his stride. He walked directly up the short steps and stepped onto the stage, stopping just inches away from her. He pulled a thick, folded warrant from his jacket and held it up. Beatrice slammed her hand on the podium. "Do you have any idea who I am?" she screamed, her voice echoing wildly across the silent room. "I am the president of Kensington Regional Bank. I have the governor on speed dial." Agent Reynolds looked at her with eyes as cold as absolute zero. He calmly reached to his heavy tactical belt and unclipped a pair of solid steel handcuffs. "Yes, ma'am, I know exactly who you are," Agent Reynolds replied, his voice steady and devoid of any sympathy. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and severe violations of the Federal Banking Act. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Beatrice gasped, stepping backward until she collided hard against the catered buffet table. A silver serving tray crashed to the floor, sending expensive hors d'oeuvres scattering everywhere. Two female agents immediately stepped forward, grabbing her arms and swiftly pulling them behind her back. The loud, sharp click of the metal handcuffs locking around her wrists echoed through the microphone that was still switched on. The sheer humiliation of the moment was completely undeniable. The sound finalized the total destruction of the Kensington Empire. Across the room, Caroline was sobbing hysterically as another team of agents read her Miranda rights regarding the forged tax documents. The board members were already sprinting toward the emergency exits, dialing their criminal defense attorneys in an absolute frenzy. Preston watched his mother being dragged away in handcuffs. The arrogant, confident facade he had worn for his entire life evaporated. He realized there was no trust fund to steal and no corporate lawyers coming to save him. The harsh reality of a lengthy federal prison sentence crashed down on him. Preston's legs completely gave out. He dropped heavily to his knees right in front of me, tearing the fabric of his expensive custom tuxedo pants. He reached out with trembling hands, grabbing the hem of my dress. "Maddie, please." He sobbed hysterically, thick tears streaming down his perfectly moisturized face. "Please, you have to stop them. Tell them it was all a massive misunderstanding. I did not know what my mother was doing, I swear. I really love you, Maddie. You are the only good thing in my life. Please save me." I looked down at the pathetic broken man kneeling at my feet. The man who had planned to leave me destitute just to pay off his underground gambling debts. I felt absolutely nothing for him. I gently reached down and pulled the delicate fabric of my dress directly out of his desperate grip. I stepped gracefully over his trembling body, looking down at him one final time. "Enjoy your new prenup with the federal government," I whispered. I turned my back on Preston, leaving him sobbing on the marble floor. I walked out of the grand ballroom through the heavy oak doors and stepped into the cool night air. For the first time in over a year, my lungs felt completely clear. The heavy, suffocating weight of the Kensington family was permanently gone. The next morning, I woke up in my modest apartment. The sun was streaming brightly through the blinds. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a cup of hot coffee, and grabbed the television remote. I turned on the major financial news network. The breaking news banner flashing across the bottom of the screen was written in bright red letters. It declared the complete federal seizure of Kensington Regional Bank. The news anchor reported that the bank president Beatrice Kensington and Vice President Preston Kensington had been arrested late last night on multiple federal charges, including wire fraud and massive corporate embezzlement. The camera cut to a live feed of the bank headquarters downtown. Yellow police tape surrounded the massive glass doors. Federal agents were actively carrying out heavy cardboard boxes filled with internal documents. The anchor announced that the bank stock, which had been artificially inflated for years, opened at absolute zero this morning. The market had completely wiped them out in a matter of hours. The prestigious financial empire they had used to terrorize and manipulate people was officially dead. I turned off the television and got dressed in a sharp, tailored suit. I drove downtown to the secure financial district and walked into the high-rise office of my attorney, Patricia Montgomery. She was already sitting at her large steel desk, reviewing a massive stack of legal injunctions. Jamal was sitting in the leather chair across from her, looking incredibly relaxed and sharply dressed. We exchanged a warm, triumphant smile. Patricia looked up and adjusted her glasses. "Good morning, Madeline," she said, her voice ringing with professional satisfaction. "The federal prosecutors move faster than I have ever seen. Beatrice and Preston were denied bail this morning. They are currently sitting in federal holding cells. That is exactly where they belong," I replied, taking a seat next to Jamal. "But what about my father trust fund? They stole $11 million. Is any of it actually recoverable?" Patricia handed me a thick legal document. "We filed an emergency asset freeze at dawn," she explained, tapping the paper. "Because we proved the embezzlement was directly tied to their personal holding accounts, the federal judge granted us immediate authorization to seize their remaining personal assets to repay your stolen trust fund." We just froze all of Beatrice's offshore accounts. We are officially placing a lien on the massive Kensington country estate, and we are seizing Preston luxury penthouse. Jamal leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. And do not forget the vehicles, Jamal added, his eyes gleaming with quiet justice. The authorities are currently towing Beatrice imported sedans and Preston sports cars. Every single piece of luxury they bought with your money is being liquidated to restore your inheritance. They are left with absolutely nothing but the prison uniforms on their backs. I looked down at the asset seizure documents. The sheer magnitude of the justice being served was overwhelming. My father's legacy was not going to be squandered by greedy corporate criminals. I was getting everything back. Suddenly, my secure burner phone vibrated aggressively in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was an unknown incoming number. I answered the call, putting the phone on speaker and resting it on the glass table between Patricia and Jamal. "Madeline, please, is that you?" A frantic, hysterical voice practically screamed through the small speaker. It was Caroline. "Yes, Caroline, it is me," I replied, keeping my voice entirely calm and detached. "Madeline, you have to help me." Caroline sobbed, her voice cracking with pure panic. "I am standing in the lobby of a cheap motel off the highway. I tried to use my black card to book a room at the Four Seasons, but it was declined. I tried my secondary credit cards and my debit cards, but the bank said every single account under my name is completely frozen. I cannot even buy a cup of coffee. I am completely locked out of my own life." She paused, gasping for air before delivering her desperate plea. "I know my mother and Preston did some bad things to you, Madeline, but I had nothing to do with it. Please, I am begging you. Can you just wire me a small loan? Just a few $1,000s so I can afford a motel room and some food until I figure this out. I have absolutely nowhere else to go now." I listened to the desperate trembling in her voice. A year ago, or even a month ago, I might have felt a flicker of sympathy for her. I might have believed her tearful claims of innocence and wired her the cash just to keep the peace. But the memory of her sitting right in my office demanding free labor while casually bragging about my stolen inheritance was permanently seared into my brain. She was not a victim of circumstance. She was a willing, arrogant participant in a corrupt system that crushed anyone who stood in its way. I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling completely centered and detached from her manufactured crisis. "Caroline, you are a 30-year-old woman who has never worked a single day in her life," I said, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. "You sat in my office and laughed about using my dead father money as your personal slush fund. You called me the help. Now you expect the help to rescue you from the consequences of your own greed." I let the cold silence hang for a moment, letting the brutal, undeniable truth of her situation sink in. "The Kensington Regional Bank is permanently closed, Caroline. And so is my patience. Do not ever call me again." Before she could utter another hysterical sob, I pressed the red button and ended the call. I immediately navigated to my phone settings. I selected her burner number and hit block. I then went through my contact list and permanently blocked Beatrice and Preston. I blocked the estate landlines, the country club numbers, and the emails of every person associated with that toxic family. I deleted their contact files entirely, wiping their digital existence from my life. The ultimate boundary was officially enforced. No contact meant absolutely zero access. They had spent months trying to make me feel small and powerless. But in a matter of seconds, I had completely severed their access to my world. The psychological relief was instantaneous and profound. It felt as if a heavy, suffocating fog had suddenly lifted from my shoulders. I looked at Patricia and Jamal sitting across the table. They both nodded in silent, absolute approval. A week later, I was sitting in my own agency office. The phones were ringing constantly. The corporate clients Beatrice had aggressively intimidated into canceling their contracts had all called back, begging to reinstate our services after the massive banking scandal hit the national news. My business was thriving, recovering with a renewed, fierce energy. The glass door of my office swung open and Jamal walked in. I almost did not recognize him at first glance. He was not wearing the stiff corporate suits he used to wear to the Kensington family dinners. He wore a relaxed tailored blazer and a simple dark shirt. But the biggest change was his posture. He looked at least 10 years younger. The tense, guarded expression he always carried around Caroline was completely gone. He walked with the confident, easy stride of a man who was finally entirely free from a toxic environment. He walked over to my desk holding 2 paper cups of expensive artisan coffee. He handed one to me and took a seat in the guest chair. "I hear your marketing agency is acquiring some massive new accounts," he said, smiling warmly. I took a sip of the hot coffee, nodding. "The trash took itself out, Jamal. My business is doing better than ever." Jamal raised his paper cup slightly, holding it out toward me. I tapped my cup against his, sharing a toast. To outsmarting the elite, he said, his voice filled with genuine satisfaction. "They thought we were disposable. They thought they could use our skills to shield their own corruption. They underestimated our intelligence because they were blinded by their own arrogance." I smiled back, feeling a deep sense of mutual respect. "We survived because we did not play their rigged game," I replied. "We built our own." Jamal slowly set his coffee down and opened his briefcase. His expression shifted from relaxed to professional. He reached inside and pulled out a legal document bound in heavy blue paper. "Patricia asked me to drop this off on my way to the courthouse," he explained, sliding the document across my desk. "The federal judge finalized the asset liquidation rulings this morning." I looked down at the official court seal. Jamal tapped the front page, his smile returning wider than before. "The judge has ordered the absolute full restoration of your $12 million trust fund, Madeline. But because of the severe breach of fiduciary duty and the emotional distress they deliberately caused you, the judge did not just stop there. He has also awarded you massive punitive damages." I stared at the heavy blue paper resting on my desk, feeling the incredible weight of those words. Punitive damages. It meant the court recognized the profound malicious intent behind their actions. They had deliberately tried to destroy my life for their own corporate gain. Jamal smiled, leaning back in the guest chair. "We had won the battle, but the war was not officially over until the criminal sentencing concluded. The federal justice system moves deliberately, and the next 6 months passed in a whirlwind of depositions, asset seizures, and intense restructuring for my agency." The weather turned cold, giving way to a crisp autumn as the final court date finally arrived. It was a brisk Tuesday morning when Jamal and I walked up the wide concrete steps of the downtown federal courthouse. The imposing granite building stood as a silent testament to the absolute power of the law. We passed through the heavy metal detectors and rode the crowded elevator up to the 4th floor. The courtroom gallery was already packed shoulder to shoulder with local journalists, ruined bank investors, and former Kensington Country Club members, who were all eager to witness the spectacular fall of their local corporate royalty. Jamal and I found 2 seats in the 2nd row, directly behind the heavy wooden barrier that separated the gallery from the defense tables. The atmosphere inside the room was thick with anticipation. The heavy oak doors at the side of the courtroom suddenly clicked open, and a hush fell over the entire crowd. 2 armed federal marshals stepped into the room, leading the defendants. My breath caught slightly in my throat as I watched Beatrice and Preston shuffle into the courtroom. The transformation was absolutely staggering. The incredibly wealthy, arrogant socialites who had once terrorized me were completely gone. Gone were the emerald designer gowns, the heavy diamond bracelets, and the perfectly tailored Italian silk suits. Instead, Beatrice and Preston were wearing identical bright orange prison jumpsuits. Their wrists and ankles were bound by heavy steel chains that clinked loudly with every single step they took across the carpeted floor. Beatrice looked frail and completely stripped of her manufactured high society power. Her blonde hair was entirely graying at the roots, and her face was deeply lined with exhaustion and defeat. Preston walked with his head bowed, staring at the floor, unable to meet the eyes of the angry crowd. They took their seats at the defense table, looking incredibly small under the harsh fluorescent lights. The federal judge, a stern woman with decades of experience on the bench, banged her wooden gavel demanding absolute silence. She looked down at the Kensington family with a gaze of pure judicial disgust. She spent the next 20 minutes explicitly detailing the sheer magnitude of their financial crimes. She spoke about the $11 million systematically embezzled from a deceased father and the horrifying audacity of using a sacred marriage contract to legally shield a massive corporate felony. Beatrice Kensington and Preston Kensington, the judge announced, her voice echoing with finality. You used your immense privilege and your financial institution not to build a community, but to aggressively prey upon an orphaned woman. Your actions demonstrate a breathtaking level of greed and a complete lack of basic human decency. Therefore, on the charges of wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and severe breach of fiduciary duty, I am sentencing both of you to a maximum term of 15 years in a federal penitentiary. Furthermore, because of the predatory nature of your crimes, this sentence will be served without the possibility of parole. A collective gasp of shock and intense satisfaction rippled through the crowded gallery. 15 years without parole meant their lives as they knew them were permanently over. They would lose their entire prime in a concrete cell. Preston immediately buried his face in his chained hands, his shoulders shaking violently as he broke down into loud, pathetic sobs. Beatrice, however, did not cry. As the federal marshals stepped forward to grab her arms and escort her away to begin her 15-year sentence, she slowly turned her head around. She looked past her defense attorneys and searched the crowded gallery until her eyes locked directly onto mine. For a brief second, I saw the desperate, shattered woman underneath the corporate predator. She was looking at me with wide, terrified eyes, silently expecting to see some small flicker of pity, or perhaps the submissive forgiveness she had always demanded from me. But I offered her absolutely nothing. I did not smile and I did not gloat. I kept my posture perfectly straight and my expression completely cold. Maintaining unbroken eye contact with the woman who tried to destroy my future, I simply gave her one small definitive nod, acknowledging my absolute victory. The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom closed behind Beatrice and Preston, sealing their fate forever. I exhaled a breath I felt like I had been holding for 2 entire years. The Kensington nightmare was finally over. 1 exact year later, I stood on the balcony of a sprawling downtown penthouse event space, looking out over the glittering city skyline. I was no longer the exhausted woman fighting to keep a struggling digital marketing agency afloat in a cramped apartment. The federal court had transferred every single cent of my father's $12 million trust fund back into my name, along with a massive settlement from the liquidation of the Kensington estate. But I did not take the money and hide. I used it as a foundation. I took my small agency and transformed it into a towering corporate powerhouse. We now occupied 3 floors of a pristine glass high-rise right in the center of the financial district. But my mission had changed completely. I shifted my entire business model to specifically champion women entrepreneurs. We provided cutting-edge marketing, subsidized legal counsel, and comprehensive financial literacy programs for female founders. I made it my absolute life mission to ensure that no woman would ever be intimidated, isolated, or financially manipulated by predatory corporate bullies ever again. We taught them how to read complex ledgers, how to spot toxic contracts, and how to build their own impenetrable financial independence. Tonight was the inaugural charity gala for our new foundation. Unlike the suffocating fake high society events Beatrice used to host at her exclusive country club, this room was filled with genuine joy and authentic power. There were no hidden agendas or whispered insults disguised as polite conversation. The massive ballroom hummed with the vibrant energy of hundreds of brilliant self-made women networking and lifting each other up. Waiters circulated with silver trays of champagne while a lively jazz band played in the corner. I wore a stunning deep emerald gown that I purchased with my own hard-earned money. I felt completely radiant and entirely in control of my own destiny. A familiar, reassuring presence stepped up beside me at the balcony railing. Jamal handed me a glass of sparkling water and offered a warm, easy smile. He wore a perfectly tailored tuxedo, but the heavy defensive armor he used to carry around the Kensington family was entirely gone. Following the massive federal takedown, he had become a highly sought-after hero in the legal world. He was now a named senior partner at one of the most prestigious corporate law firms in the state specializing in forensic financial defense. We clinked our glasses together, enjoying the peaceful view of the city below us. We had survived the ultimate betrayal together. We were no longer just two outsiders, forced to sit quietly at a toxic family dinner table. We were bound by absolute loyalty and mutual respect. Jamal was my truest chosen family. I leaned against the cool glass railing and looked back inside the beautifully illuminated ballroom. I watched a young tech founder eagerly pitch her startup to a room full of female angel investors. I listened to the rich, genuine laughter echoing over the music. My heart swelled with a profound sense of peace. I thought about the quiet, brilliant father I lost so many years ago. He had meticulously locked away a fortune, hoping it would provide me with a safe, comfortable life. He instituted the marriage clause thinking a husband would offer me an extra layer of security. He could never have predicted the absolute nightmare his wealth would attract. But as I watched the incredible community of strong, independent women I had helped build, I realized the profound truth of my journey. The trust fund he left behind actually did exactly what he always intended. It protected me. But it did not protect me by making my life easy, or by handing me over to a wealthy family. It protected me by forcing me into the absolute fire. It forced me to uncover my own terrifying strength to burn down a corrupt empire and to forge myself into a woman who would never need a savior again. I turned away from the balcony and stepped back into the warmth of the ballroom. Jamal gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze before blending back into the crowd to greet a group of excited investors. I walked slowly through the room, absorbing the vibrant energy of the life I had built. As I watched these incredible women networking and sharing their ambitions, I could not help but reflect on the twisted family dynamic that had almost destroyed me. The Kensington family operated on a viciously simple psychological system. They required a golden child and a scapegoat to survive. Caroline and Preston were the ultimate golden children. They were shielded from every single consequence, perpetually rewarded for their cruelty, and taught that the world was simply an endless bank account waiting for their command. But that golden pedestal was entirely made of fragile glass. When the federal hammer finally fell, their complete lack of resilience shattered them instantly. They had no idea how to exist in a harsh reality where they could not simply buy their way out of accountability. And then there was me. I was brought into their toxic fold specifically to be the ultimate scapegoat. They looked at my modest background and my lack of a living family, and they saw the perfect disposable human shield. They genuinely believed that because I had grown up without extreme wealth, I would be so desperately grateful for a seat at their mahogany table that I would never dare to question the menu. They expected me to blindly absorb their federal crime smile for the country club cameras and go quietly into the financial slaughterhouse. They weaponized my desire for a family against me. They thought handing me an expensive bouquet of roses and forcing me into a cheap polyester wedding dress would be enough to keep me distracted while they drained my inheritance. But that is the fatal flaw of predators. They mistake a calm demeanor for stupidity. They mistake kindness for weakness, and they mistake silence for submission. If I could impart one absolute truth to the women standing in this room, and to anyone who has ever felt trapped by a toxic dynamic, it would be this. Your true power never lies in the man you marry, or the prestigious family name you are invited to take. Your absolute, unbreakable power lies in your own financial independence. When someone else controls your bank account, they control your reality. They dictate your choices, your voice, and your freedom to walk away. The moment Beatrice told me not to worry, my pretty head about high finance, was the exact moment I knew I had to find those hidden ledgers. Society conditions women to ignore subtle red flags in the name of a fairy tale romance. We are taught to be accommodating when a partner isolates us from our friends, when they rush the relationship timeline, or when their family continually violates our boundaries. We are told to keep the peace. I am telling you to start a war. Do not ignore the red flags. Lean into them. Dig beneath the surface until you find the truth. True partnership does not require you to sign away your legal rights in a locked marble bathroom, and it certainly does not demand you blindly finance a failing empire. If you secure your own money, you secure your own ultimate leverage. You gain the power to stand up from any table where respect and transparency are no longer being served. The charity gala eventually wound down in a beautiful chorus of laughter and exchanged business cards. The jazz band played their final upbeat set, and the guests slowly filtered out into the crisp night air, carrying newfound corporate alliances and genuine hope. I stayed behind until the massive penthouse event space was completely empty. I thanked the catering staff for their flawless service, and then took the private elevator down to the executive floor where my agency offices were located. I walked down the quiet carpeted hallway and unlocked the heavy glass doors of my personal executive suite. The room was dark, except for the ambient golden glow of the city skyline pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I walked over to my massive modern desk. It was perfectly organized, holding only my laptop, a sleek notepad, and a small, simple framed photograph of my late father. I picked up the silver frame and smiled, tracing the edge with my thumb. We had finally won. His brilliant legacy was safe, and it was actively changing the world for the better. I set the picture down and picked up my leather briefcase. I slid my laptop inside and snapped the brass clasps shut. I slipped into my tailored wool coat and walked slowly toward the exit. I paused at the doorway, resting my hand on the polished silver light switch. I looked back at the beautiful sprawling office I had built entirely from the ashes of their deceit. I had survived the ultimate betrayal and emerged stronger than I ever thought possible. I was completely independent. I was unapologetically wealthy. And above all else, I was entirely free. I flicked the light switch, plunging the pristine office into a peaceful, quiet darkness. I stepped out into the hallway and let the heavy glass door lock securely behind me. They thought I was a pawn in their financial game. They didn't know I owned the board,